The following program was produced by Oak Brook Productions for Moet Hennessy USA.
Hi, I'm Jane, and if you ever wondered where champagne comes from or how it's made, just stick around for the next half hour and I'll tell you all about it. Welcome to the show. I'm standing in front of the famous cathedral in the city of Reims, located in the northern region of France. It's about 1 hour east of Paris and is considered the capital of Champagne. Now, traveling to France to do a documentary about Champagne is admittedly exciting, but also a bit intimidating. After all, we'll be visiting 5 of the world's leading producers: Moet and Chandon, Ruinart, Krug, Dom Perignon, and Veuve Clicquot. Over the course of this program, we'll take you up close and personal, inside many areas not often seen by the public, and hopefully you'll learn, like we did, that champagne isn't just for parties or special occasions. In fact, it's a drink you can enjoy just about any time. Before we get too technical, it's a good idea to get your bearings. This map outlines where the Champagne region is in relation to Paris and the rest of the French countryside. If we zoom a little closer, you can see to the north is Reims, and about 40 minutes south over the hills lies the town of Epernay. Each of the champagne houses we'll be featuring over the next half hour have their headquarters in and around these 2 cities. Now, if you really want to enjoy a great glass of bubbly, the first thing you need to know is how it all began. The champagne dates back to the 1700s, so getting to the bottom of the bubbles means visiting where it all began. It could be traced directly to one unassuming Benedictine monk. This is the original portion of the abbey at Auvillers. It's where Dom Perignon pursued his grape-growing, winemaking, and advanced the creation of champagne. To help support the abbey, Dom Perignon developed a winemaking business by using the region's surrounding vineyards. It was during his wine production when he discovered champagne by accident. Before wine can be aged, the alcohol needs to ferment. He noticed this process stopped in the winter months, but restarted as the weather warmed.
As a result of this interrupted fermentation, there were little fine bubbles in the wine, and he invented this beautiful product that we call champagne.
Dom Perignon was also the first person to make white wine from red grapes, use natural corks, and mix various varietals into one blend.
For all of those reasons, Dom Perignon is in fact the father of champagne.
Shortly thereafter, other winemakers hopped on the bubble bandwagon. One important female figure is Madame Clicquot. She invented a process called riddling in 1816, and it's still being used today, especially at the yellow label, Veuve Clicquot headquarters in Reims.
The whole purpose of the riddling method is to bring the sediments into the neck of the bottle.
She's also credited as the first person to introduce champagne to other countries, like Russia at the end of the Napoleonic Wars. And while Madame Clicquot was busy shipping to the east, another winemaker was capitalizing on the west.
Ruinart actually came to America in the mid-19th century.
Edmond Ruinart, a successor to the famous French family, packed up his bottles and arrived in Baltimore with one goal: to meet with the President of the United States.
He spent 1 hour with President Andrew Jackson, who he said was smoking his pipe in a rocking chair, and they were chatting away about French diplomacy, champagne, and everything relating to the goodwill between France and America. So in 1831 dates the first period where Champagne Ruinart was exported to America.
And voila, champagne exportation was in full swing, making France the sparkling wine capital of the world. I'm standing in the middle of 84,000 acres of vineyards that make up the entire region of Champagne, France. And if your grapes weren't picked here, you're not drinking champagne. The reason Champagne has been able to sustain its title as the premier region to produce top-of-the-line sparkling wine is because of the terroir. So what exactly is the terroir?
Good question. Terroir is a word that describes the mixture of climate, soil, land that's very unique to one vineyard site.
Centuries ago, this area used to be underwater. Oceanic deposits were left behind, leaving the soil rich with chalky limestone.
Chalk is like a sponge. It's very porous. It absorbs a lot of winter during the winter months, and then during the summer months, when you have a lot of sunlight or warmer climate, the water will be released again, and the vines will be nourished.
Atmosphere and landscape are also key components in growing the perfect grape.
The vines in the Champagne region are generally quite low to the ground because the soil reflects the sunlight up towards the plant. The vineyards are all located on east and south facing slopes in order to get the optimum amount of sunlight. We're really at the most northern point of where you can grow vineyards, so we have a very high rainfall.
Despite hundreds of different varietals and producers, all Champagne is made from only 3 types of grapes: the Chardonnay grape, the Pinot Noir, and the Pinot Meunier, which is a red grape producers extract a white juice from.
We tend to get high acidity in the grapes as well, but the grapes ripen over a very long period of time, which then results in wines that are quite complex and very delicate.
Each plot is very valuable, but not all vineyards produce the same yield, which is one of the reasons the price of your champagne fluctuates year to year. And if you're driving down the countryside, you'll see these marked stones so everyone knows exactly who owns what. Some of the winemakers get so specific, they pay the landowners for just a few rows. And if you're Krug, you have an entire walled vineyard just to yourself. This is the town of Le Mesnil-sur-Oger in the heart of the Côte des Blancs, which is the home to the best Chardonnay vineyards in Champagne. It's also home to Krug's famous walled vineyard known as the Clos des Mesnil.
D'effectuer ce qu'on appelle la taille.
Pascal Levesque is the Clos vineyard manager. He took us on a tour with our English-speaking Krug ambassador, Kurt Dienel.
So in 1698, the vineyard was planted with the Chardonnay grape before the town was actually built around.
Prior to the 20th century, the Clos was independently run. In 1976, Krug purchased it to increase its holding of high-end Chardonnay grapes.
The uniqueness of this vineyard to us is that it has an incredible microclimate and terroir. Thanks to the chalky soil, the town which protects us not only from the coldness but also from hail and frost, and provides a very, very unique vineyard and quality Chardonnay.
The Clos is 1.8 hectares, which is only about 4 acres, a mere fraction of the entire Côte des Blancs.
This produces, on a vintage year, anywhere from 10 to 12,000 bottles.
This
Right.
area, 10 to 12,000
10 to 12,000 bottles, which sounds like a lot.
Yeah.
But Champagne is 330 million bottles.
Wow. Because these grapes are among the most valuable in all the world, vintages like Krug's Grand Cuvée are among the rarest and most expensive. Okay, we're just getting started, so coming up next. From the press room to the riddling racks, we'll show you what happens after the grapes get handpicked at harvest. And the view above ground is only half the story. We'll take you deep beneath the streets of Champagne to discover one of the world's best-kept secrets. With the best bubbly comes top-of-the-line cuisine. We'll speak to one of Moet's most celebrated chefs and sample what French fare works well with various varietals. Welcome back to the show. The process of making champagne is very involved. There are hundreds of people that are responsible for every bottle, and it takes years to perfect. Here's a look inside how it's produced. It all starts with the harvest.
The harvest takes place around September, and it usually takes place over a period of 2 weeks, and all the grapes are picked by hand.
Within hours of being picked, the grapes are shipped, oh so carefully shipped, to a press house and squeezed of their juices. This is the Manoir des Verzys. It was once home to the vineyard director here at Veuve-Clicquot. And right over here, you'll see a hand-crank grape press, which was built in 1784. And even though it's over 200 years old, the same principles are used today. Okay, so they don't hand crank the press anymore, but wooden presses like these at Veuve-Clicquot are carefully calibrated to extract just the right amount of juice.
To have a good press, it's necessary to have a very low level of pressure. So we can have a juice which go very gently out of the grapes.
The juice gets funneled into a moat around the press. It flows through these tubes and gets stored in small tanks underneath. Once the juice is extracted, the alcohol needs to ferment, not once, but twice.
It's a transformation of the sugar in alcohol and carbonic gas. It's the first fermentation.
Depending on the winemaker, this takes approximately 10 days. Then over the next 2 months, the chef de cave, also known as the executive winemaker, and a committee taste test the wine to determine what will be used.
And every day with my team, we have to taste 24 different tanks, 24 different samples.
Then the wine goes into its second fermentation. Sugar and yeast are added. It's at this point when wine officially becomes champagne.
Once the yeast has transformed the sugar into alcohol, it dissolves. It dissolves into sediments.
Naturally, the residue needs to be removed. This process is known as riddling.
A riddler is someone that job is to turn the bottles clockwise, an eighth or quarter of a turn every day, and change the angle of the bottle.
Yes, at some houses, there literally is one person who must do this every day. At a large cellar like Veuve Clicquot, a riddler typically handles 40,000 bottles each day. Of course, there are also modernized ways to speed up the process.
We use two methods to do riddling, either by the pipette, which is the classical way it was done in the Madame Clicquot's time, and since the beginning of the 1980s with the SICAM, by using the SICAM, which is this hexagonal cage.
After about 6 weeks, all this turning and gravity takes its toll, ensuring the sediments have floated to the tip of the bottle. They're all then disgorged by quick freezing the neck and forcing out the frozen plug. Voila, crystal clear champagne. But don't expect to see these bottles on store shelves anytime soon. It's up to the individual producers to age the champagne for as long as they deem necessary. Still to come on Behind the Bubbly. It's one of the coolest tours you can take if you aren't afraid of a cavernous climate.
You can feel the temperature. It's cooling down.
Yeah, you can feel it dropping. The folks at Ruinart take us underground for a look inside their classic cellars. Then,
very promising.
We'll break down how the world's leading producers blend their wines to create a cuvée, keeping consumers coming back for more. I'm in the fermentation cellar here at Krug, and this room houses over 1,500 barrels, and it's the only champagne house that ferments 100% of its wine in small oak casks. Essentially, Krug Champagne is born right here. While this family-run operation may not produce as much champagne as some of its sister companies, on the average year it yields about 500,000 bottles. But a majority of those bottles make up one of the most complex champagnes in the world.
The flagship of Krug, as you know, is Krug Grand Cuvée, which is a marvelous blend of 6 to 10 different years. And when you drink this glass, you find the 3 types of grapes you have in Champagne. Not only you find the origins from 25, 30 different villages, 6 to 10 different years, but at the end of the process, at the end of the blending, you have a blend of 60 to 80 different wines.
After the blending process, the wines need to age. Typically, this is done below ground. There are over 100 miles of cellars beneath the streets of Reims and Epernay. And I was lucky enough to get a tour from the chef de cave, Frédéric Paniotis, who showed us what Ruinart's subterranean storage system looks like.
These cellars are the only classified cellars in Champagne as a historical monument.
Oh, we're going down more?
We're going down more.
Wow. How far below ground are we?
We are now at about 75 feet below ground. So, and you can really feel the atmosphere of the cellars.
Yeah, and this is the main area of your cellars.
This is one of the main areas.
And how many miles does this run?
They extend for about 6 miles.
6 miles of cellars?
Right.
The cellars in Champagne are very important, and they date back how far?
Well, most of the cellars in Champagne, in this part of Reims anyway, date back to the Roman times. So they're like 2,000 years old for the oldest ones. The Romans dug those chalk pits to extract the rock, which they used afterwards to build the city of Reims, which at the time was named Durocortorum. And so they have that very typical shape as almost like a pyramid.
Yeah, so they came through here to dig out
right,
the
they were digging and
chalk,
lifting the chalk up, right. Then at the Middle Age, there were more cellars dig at the time. And then at the beginning, or at the end of the 19th century, Ruinart came here and used this wonderful place. As a
Well,
cellar,
because it was already cut open.
it was, yeah, and it was, where they needed space because of the aging of the champagne. You need space, you need a lot of space to put your champagne. When it aged 3, 4, 5, and 6 years, and sometimes more, you need a lot of space.
And these were already here, so
well,
Lunar didn't have to dig anything.
Well, no, they didn't have to dig. They had to, make connections through the different chalk pits and play with the different, levels. And it was not always easy, but what a fantastic place. And then for the wine, with the humidity and the temperature, it's the best storage condition you can think of.
And how many cellars are in the Champagne region?
Well, I think the Champagne region is like a big Swiss cheese underneath. It's there are miles and miles of cellars.
So if you're lucky enough to visit Reims or any part of the Champagne region, don't forget, as you're walking along the streets, there's an entire subterranean city at work right under your feet. Still ahead on the show, how to choose your stemware, and
it's also a question of taste.
We'll give you easy tips on how you can complement your champagne with the proper cuisine. And before you think you have to cook like a 5-star chef, this is a lesson you can easily digest. So you're at the store selecting a bottle of the Bubbly, and whether it's your first time or 50th, there are always a few things to keep in mind before you buy. So we know sparkling wine can only be considered champagne if it was made in this specific region in France. Plus, now you also know how much work goes into producing each bottle. So you can understand why this bubbly beverage tends to be a little more expensive than your typical still wine. But price isn't everything. If you're still confused on how to choose the right blend, here are 3 tips to keep in mind. Consider the meal you want to match it with. Generally speaking, brutes pair better with pasta and seafood, while rosés balance well with poultry, lamb, or duck. Also, get to know your vintage. 1999 and 2000 are considered the best years currently on the market. They're the years when the crops produce grapes with superior quality and taste. And don't overthink it. If you're throwing a big party, buy several bottles and do a taste test. Go with what you think tastes best. And finally, once you bring that bottle home, don't pour it into any old glass. The stemware you use can make all the difference in the overall taste of your champagne.
When you open a fantastic bottle of wine, Dom Pérignon for example, you like to smell the wine first at the first sip, and then to let it in your glass and then to come back to the wine, and you will see that the wine is changing because the wine is opening itself. I think that's a sign of big wines. All the big wines are changing during time in your glass.
In America, we always drink our champagne, or we think of drinking champagne out of a flute, something really long and skinny. Is that okay?
Well, the flute, if it's too skinny, is probably not the best to get all the flavors, because it's a bit too narrow. You can see the bubbles, which is fine, but you don't get as much flavors as you would get from a slightly broader glass like this one.
And does it matter the height of the glass, or?
It does matter because you see the bubbles raise up, and that's part of the beauty also of drinking champagne. I mean, there's the wine, but the bubbles also are here, and you want to be able to see them fine. You see the fine bubbles go up and then explode on the surface.
And what are we going to drink out of a bigger bottom like this?
You actually could drink a red wine out of this glass.
You could drink a red wine out of this glass.
Absolutely. What you want to avoid with champagne is this the one that were used, let's say, in the 1900s, the early 1900s. This sort of a flat shape, more like we call it a coupe, or so it's more flat. It's not as tall. It's wider.
It's wider.
You don't get to see the bubbles, and then you don't get to see you don't get much nose because it's too wide.
And it's all escaping out the side.
Absolutely.
As opposed to thinking of fashion and what it's going to look like on your table or on your service plate, you should really go for what's going to make it taste better.
If you have a fine champagne, yeah, definitely. I think this is very important, because what's the point of of buying a fairly expensive champagne and then ruin the taste because it's the inappropriate glass. What I would do with a very fine champagne, especially like a vintage Dorina, if you don't have the proper glassware, if you don't have this type of glass, then use a wine glass. Use a regular wine glass.
You could put your champagne in a wine glass.
Yes, I would definitely do that instead of using the wrong glassware. If you don't have the appropriate flute, then use a regular wine glass.
I'm here at the French Garden at Moet Chandon, and I'm about to go in for a very special tasting with the chef de cuisine, Pascal Tungo, and learn how to pair different food with champagne. Tell me about this champagne a little bit.
This champagne is a vintage 2000, which is the most exquisite vintage and the last vintage from Moet. And it's really the grand vintage. It's simplicity and perfection. It's pairing with shrimp, with scallops, with a lot of oysters, something very fresh like this with a little bit of saltiness. And it can match also with langoustine, with lobster.
So mostly seafood?
Mostly seafood, mostly fish and freshness. You have the freshness in this champagne. And you have a little bit also of complexity. And it's interesting to match with different aromas like sesame or things like this.
Let's move on to rosé.
This is a Moët & Chandon Rosé Grand Vintage 2000.
Rosé at home is one of the hottest things going in the market. Everyone's buying rosé champagne. So it was great with the lamb. Any other suggestions?
You can go with beef, you can go with a barbecue style, with a barbecue, chicken barbecue or something like this. It's really, rosé is an amazing wine, really strong enough to match with Venaison also.
Chef, in the U.S., we always think that champagne is a drink of celebration and not necessarily something we'd eat with dinner. Is that true?
That's in most of the country. You have the champagne is a celebration drink, and it's true that it's a celebration drink, but it's a wine. So as a wine, it has a specificity of a wine, and it can be drunk during all the meal. It can be drunk with every dishes. It can be with a starter, and after with a main course and with a dessert.
So now that we have your mouths watering, let's recap a little bit about what we've learned. The Champagne region is over 84,000 acres and produces 3 types of grapes: the Chardonnay grape, the Pinot Noir, and the Pinot Meunier. Many of these get blended. Producers like Moët Chandon, Krug, Veuve Clicquot, Dom Perignon, and Ruinart all take great care when harvesting, pressing, fermenting, and aging their champagne, all to ensure consumers are purchasing the highest quality product in the world. Remember, once you bring that bottle home, pour it into a flute that has a bit of a body to it. You want that flavor to explode in your mouth. And if you're at a restaurant, brutes are dry, so think fresh, think seafood. Rosés pair best with meats like game or poultry. And don't limit yourself. Champagne is best served anytime you feel like it. Voila! I hope you enjoyed this tour of Champagne and even learned a thing or two. Now, even if you can't speak French, you can feel French the next time you pop the cork on a bottle of champagne. Au revoir, mon ami!
The preceding program was produced by Oak Brook Productions for Moet Hennessy, USA.